You had a nice vacation, Kyle? And you listened to quite a bit of Linkin Park on that vacation? I'm calling you out. You're sending mixed messages. Boom, gotcha. You walked right into that. DarbyCast, Wildcard Friday. Kyle went out of town. Did you not? But listening to Linkin Park, you're obviously experiencing some heavy emotions. Surface, placid. Deep under the water of your emotions, Kyle, a maelstrom. And I get it, we all do, right? It's the year before a presidential election. And boy, do they ramp up the propaganda, which ultimately culminates in some election results as the trigger event to spiral people into nonsense. If you're new to this show, leave, because we're about to get into some stuff that's a little bit real, a little bit raw, a lot of hardcore predictions, which, if you're a longtime listener to the show, you know tend to always come true, almost invariably. This is going to be a quasi-prophecy episode, very concerning to some, soothing to others. It feels like a repeat of 2015, not in the same way, though, Kyle. And we're going to relate this back to your troubled heart that I'm seeing in a crystal clear kind of way, despite the fact that you are trying to dupe me with lighthearted chicanery. But let's talk about 2015 first. Enter Donald J. Trump into the scene. Billions of dollars of media coverage on Donnie J by liberal media. They were acting like they didn't like him at all, but really he was just driving their ratings in such a substantial way that they shifted their entire business model to focus exclusively on Donald J. Trump. And that was no accident, Kyle. The 2016 election was shaping up to be a real doozy. We had WikiLeaks come out, Julian Assange, right? The Podesta emails, goodness gracious, were those littered with coded words that were really concerning. Most people were pretty startled by what was going on there. But there was a huge shift that happened in 2015, 2016. This was no longer an election that concerned the left and the right. It was good versus evil. There was nothing practical about politics anymore. It became a proxy battleground for a quasi-religious, moralizing war. We know this, Kyle. My goodness. And a lot of people, myself included, thought Donnie J was pretty funny. And he was. Still is in a lot of ways. The right side of the political aisle in the country thought Donnie J was pretty hilarious. Some people were like, yeah, he's the second coming. And that was pushing it. A lot of people put quite a bit of hope in Donnie J. And that's odd, right? Our country is facing problems that cannot be fixed in the politosphere. Especially, Kyle, because democracy isn't real. We covered this in episode 18 of the DarbyCast, entitled American Politics, Season 9. I don't even know what season we're in now. The seasons are getting shorter. Some of those seasons that have happened over the past couple years, though, Kyle, the Russian collusion whodunit, COVID, Ukraine, some climate stuff, and it's all a show, right? What's the actual thing that matters most, Kyle? That's right, the economy and illegal immigration. These subjects are not getting a lot of burn. Why? Because the show that is American politics has completely shifted, like I said a few moments ago, into a referendum on mainly secular morality, which isn't rooted in anything. It's just a lot of buzzwords, right? Love is love, justice for all. Yes, we can. Who are we? The right side of history. Ultimately, a bunch of hollow nonsense and closed definitions. Love is love? People say that and they think they're saying something. It's about the equivalent of me saying basketball is basketball. A cheeseburger is a cheeseburger. Laughter is laughter. But we're now in, let's just call it American politics season 14. Okay, Kyle. But right now you've got all these Donnie J indictments, which are for the most part pretty ludicrous, but they are part of the plan, right? You want to agitate the entire political spectrum as much as possible to tease the population and get them riled up, distracting everybody from the fact that the economy has been tanking since 2008, potentially before that. Kyle, this episode is not that funny. I'm not going to lie to you, but it is important nonetheless. We haven't done one of these in a while. If you're new to the show and this is your first episode, just know that this is taking a much more serious and thoughtful tone than we typically do. A lot of the time we dabble in fiction, but sometimes I've just got to be straightforward and communicate directly. I reserve that right. Okay, Kyle? But Trump is now getting, similar to 2015, billions of dollars worth of comp news coverage, right? Getting everybody riled up, saying, oh boy, we got to vote our way to something. To the people on the right who believe that democracy is a real thing, this looks like the weaponization of the judicial system, which, if this weren't all just one big show, it certainly would be. We live in kind of a meme country completely divorced from reality as a consequence of the technology that has warped our perceptions both of the outside world and ourselves entirely and irreparably. There's no going back, right? But both people who think democracy's real and right-wing talking heads are crying out, this is not okay, what's being done to Donnie J. People on the left who have no idea what's going on with anything. We're talking about people who are still getting booster shots. They're thrilled by the weaponization of the justice system, or at least this part of the show. They will be sorely disappointed when they realize that none of these charges or indictments will stick at all, and that this is pretty much just a part of the show. Donnie J will win in 2024. I've said it before, and I'm going to say it again. He will win in 2024, or it will be heavily contested, Kyle. The left will spaz out. The people who have been walked down the garden path of thinking that January 6th wasn't a three-letter agency co-opted ruse to get boomers to wander aimlessly around the Capitol after the Capitol Police let them enter. They just opened the doors. The January 6th insurrection, where senior citizen ladies walked around the halls of Congress waving $3 American flags that were made in China. The quintuple boosted. These people are gonna lose it when Donnie J either wins the 2024 election or it's heavily contested. They will spaz out in a way that we've never seen before. It'll make the George Floyd Summer of Love look like a walk in the park, Kyle. Then the establishment, both in the public and the private sectors, will continue to index heavily on moralizing language and oddly perverse appeals that anthropomorphize democracy, similarly to January 6th, where they were like, democracy is like a raven-haired woman of color who needs to be cherished because that's who we are. Do you remember that, Kyle? When they were like, those evil QAnon right-wing boomers tried to hold our democracy down and kiss her without whining and dining her first. And that's not the way we do things around here. That level of hollow and perverted slam poetry will be authorized yet again by media figures and left-leaning politicians. It will also be a lot like the George Floyd Summer of Love, where media figures and left-leaning politicians emphatically claimed that riots are the language of the unheard. What the fuck was that even about? Right? Do you remember that, Kyle? But 2024 is shaping up to be a calamitous year. Most people see that our democracy is, like I said earlier, a buffer between the population and the people who actually make decisions, and that it's a circus on purpose to distract people from the economy. The economy right now, Kyle, is in shambles. Inflation continues to rise. Wages are either stagnant or going down. Most dudes are not super thrilled on the direction of the country and realize that they are purposefully being discriminated against, especially those of us who can get a sunburn and who prefer vaginas to buttholes. Many dudes are dropping out a little bit to openly participate in a rigged game that is unashamedly hostile towards you. Seems a little goofy to a lot of guys. Also, the powers that influence our culture, boy, is their mission obvious as it relates to ladies. Turn them into alcoholic sluts, incapable of pair bonding. Casual sex, partying, anything but going to church, staying connected with your family, and valuing virtuosity over hedonism. That's the play that's being run on gals, and it's been going on for a while. This doesn't sit well with dudes. Most dudes, when they go shoe shopping, don't want to buy a pair of shoes that's already had 50 owners. That's basic economics. Okay. A few decades ago, people used to be able to support a family, own a home, 2 cars, and go on vacation once or twice a year on a single income. And the gals were quite a bit more loyal, spiritually sound, and didn't feel the compulsion to dominate the corporate ladder, all while adorning the mantle of saving the planet that cartoon character Captain Planet left sitting on the roadside. We are synthesizing a lot of ideas in this episode, Kyle. There is a lot to cover, but it's going to be a circumspect view of the way things are, going. The average dude in the country cannot support himself or a family very easily by himself. And the things that would motivate a dude to answer the hero's call and push him to do things that are great, those rewards, which are women, high quality gals who are literate, loving, sensible, and modest, those rewards are being destroyed on purpose by cultural puppet masters that are actually running the show. Now let's go back, quick little history lesson. 2011, Occupy Wall Street. That was the last time that the country was focused on the economy in any sort of meaningful way. There was a real unified push across categories, race, religion, creed, and deed. But then what happened to splinter that in 2011? As people were getting poorer and they saw their future becoming more bleak, there was a cohesive push to talk about the fuckery happening in banking and finance. But then we look at what happened to squash it. Social justice and intersectionality. Kyle, if you look at Google Trends dating back to 2011, you can see that the words racism, bigotry, homophobia, transphobia, chauvinism, misogyny, feminism, white supremacy, all of these things exploded onto the scene in every single search engine imaginable, which reflected the media outlets that were pushing these things. These media people, surprise, surprise, are connected with people in government, banking, and technology. So as the economic future looked bleaker and bleaker, the powers that be decided, what if we splintered people into odd identity groups and open up the borders to bring in cheap labor and additional competing cultures in order to erase people's focus on the fact that our fiat currency was in a downward and inescapable spiral, and that everybody's worldview was beginning to turn a little bit not okay. Now, Kyle, I know we're bouncing all over the place quite a bit, but I'm going to need you to follow this. Okay, I know everybody listening is keeping up swimmingly, but Kyle, you get confused sometimes, and I forgive you for that. So after 2011 and the proliferation of intersectionality and wokeness, a lot of people began to scratch their heads and say, hey, so what the fuck is this about? These seem like non-issues, but they are certainly dominating our culture and ruining people's mental health, both men and women. Drugs from China and Mexico enter the country through our porous southern border, and the opiate crisis enters full swing, Kyle. The economic situation continues to worsen. The education system gets on board with pushing intersectionality and eventually wokeism, critical race theory, critical gender theory. Hopelessness rooted in economics is exacerbated by this circus of a culture. And rather than address how absurd our culture had become, or the economics that underpinned all of it, the population was flooded with drugs, contributing to overdose deaths, which could be classified technically as suicides. College admission standards evaporate. Universities begin to admit just about anyone with a pulse, and dumbasses enter the university system in a huge way. Most of the people admitted to universities are cognitively incompatible with academic rigor. The universities know this, so they loosened their academic standards and started making new departments to cater to idiots and help them graduate, all while the universities were cashing checks. A lot of student loan debt exploded in that time period, making young people at an even greater economic disadvantage. Not only did they have some bullshit degree that indoctrinated them into a school of thought that was rooted in linguistic fuckery without any sort of academic or intellectual rigor, people were now poorer. Then you had a bunch of idiots with degrees in Lord knows what, communications, sociology, Native American studies. Anything with studies tacked onto it, probably not that demanding as an academic discipline. These people entered the workforce, and boy, were they terrible at everything, but still given jobs for similar reasons that they got into college, in that they either had a vagina or said that they were from an oppressed group. These people with no real skills gravitated towards gatekeeping positions in HR and pushed more and more competent people out of the workforce as seminars on how to communicate in a way that was open-minded, respectful, and historically sensitive. As those seminars were on the rise and began to happen weekly, you had competent engineers, managers, salespeople, and otherwise say, Hey, so what the hell what are we even doing here? Intersectionality that started in 2011, entered the university system, was enforced through social media and the most sophisticated propaganda machine ever conceived. Then it spilled into the corporate world, alienating competent people who actually cared about doing things that were productive. This has hurt the economy. Surprise, surprise. And mind you, the fiat currency economy was already in an inescapable death spiral. Enter Colin Kaepernick, scrambling QB. Kyle. The NFL is the most watched sports league in the United States. Colin Kaepernick takes a stand for justice by kneeling. Takes a stand by kneeling during the national anthem. This upsets some people who are already feeling worn a little thin, not necessarily by the underlying economic reality, but they're getting pretty tired of the carpet bombing of divisive and anti-American sentiment that is everywhere at this point. Then you have Donald J. Trump hit the scene and say, I would tell that son of a bitch, you're fired. NFL fans, of which there are plenty, many of whom were not even remotely interested in politics, were now interested in politics. Left-leaning social justice warriors and dumbasses who were duped into these propaganda campaigns immediately called racism on it. And lefties who were previously not interested in politics, or sports for that matter, entered the fold of political tourism, political outrage culture. The 2015 presidential buildup inserts politics into absolutely everything. You cannot consume any information or avoid a conversation that involves politics. People are bought in to varying degrees, but it's very emotionally charged no matter what. People have strong opinions about these things. People like myself and Kyle are bemused at this entire spectacle. Were we not, Kyle? We didn't work together back then, but we've reflected on that. And if we were friends at that time, I think we would have high-fived and said, my goodness, is this whole thing a fucking joke? Now let's go back to the Julian Assange WikiLeaks dump. A lot of the population becomes hip to the fact that our government is full of criminals and traitors with some very concerning private lives. Kyle, my goodness. Pizza parties, walnut sauce, hot dog parties, Obama's $50,000 worth of hot dogs. Hill Dog, Chillbone Hillary, is identified as an extreme sketchball with a lot of question marks around her as it relates to crime, murders, corruption, foul play all around. The Billy Bush locker room talk interview drops, and we get the famous line, grab him by the pussy, which to this day is still hilarious. Trump gets branded a misogynist. Also, he dunks all over Rosie O'Donnell and calls her a disgusting pig, which is not inaccurate. Rosie O'Donnell, big lady, very loud, not funny at all. So the right is having a lot of laughs while the left gravitates towards Hill Dog, A, because she's a woman, and that all of a sudden matters a ton as it relates to leadership positions. We can't just have competent leaders anymore. They have to be ladies. Left-leaning media gives Donnie J unlimited coverage. Some people begin to view Donnie J as a hero. And at this point, the news is tabloid level BS. The quality and analysis of any news is reduced to that of People magazine and things you would find at the grocery store checkout counter. But more and more moralizing language is entering politics. Donnie J is seen as a political outsider. A lot of people buy into that. I'm mostly undecided on the deepest motivations and ultimate role of Donnie J in American politics. Although I tend to lean towards Donnie J being a Pied Piper style figure. Donnie J was popular with people who were becoming less and less thrilled by the regime. Not just the politicians, but the cultural tastemakers, string pullers of the world. People on the right began to get a more accurate view of what was really going on. And they were highly vocal about their support for Donnie J. Why is that important, Kyle? I'll tell you why. If you're running a massive operation, let's say the country, and democracy isn't real at all, it just gives the population the illusion of choice. You know that massive swaths of the population are not fired up on you. Why not make a populist candidate who speaks out against the regime, coupled with the most sophisticated surveillance and data analysis apparatus ever conceived, to identify people in your population who aren't bought in on the program? Was Donnie J in on it? I couldn't tell you. But because of the way that people expressed their adoration for Donnie J and their disgust with the current system, including but not limited to elected officials, unelected bureaucrats, titans of industry, primarily in tech, entertainment, and banking, this made it laughably easy to identify domestic opposition and people who were getting kind of too close to the mark in understanding how things worked. You had a lot of people fired up on Donnie J, thinking he was a political savior, outsider, and hero. But the outcome of Donnie J was that people felt comfortable expressing their discontent with all things going on in the country. The open border, the economy, the artificially created cultural trends that were destroying people's sense of self and the country's identity as a whole. The media and the powers that be continue to flog Donnie J with the Russia collusion whodunit and some kind of odd thing with Trump getting pissed on by a hooker. The messages that were communicated to the political left during Donnie J's presidency was that he was illegitimate, a criminal, a pervert, and the next iteration of Hitler. And a lot of people bought into that without ever really thinking about it. And mind you, a lot of these people are educated dumbasses. So they have degrees, but in decades and centuries past, they would have never been admitted to college. So you have a ton of people who think that they're geniuses and that they know what's really going on. And that the biggest problem in our country is that we've got a dictator with a spray tan who's about to turn the country into Nazi Germany. A fascist, so evil that you could criticize him on every major media outlet and social media without consequence. Brutal dictator. The right gets more vocal about how absurd most things are. Some people are hyper-focused on Donnie J and how he's a hero, but people with working brains began to see the larger picture and the deliberate destruction of the country. Fast forward to 2019, the left, who are entirely consumed by the single issue narrative that Donald Trump is the only problem in the country and must be stopped, are frothing. And then enter Joe Biden, a half brain-dead geriatric who did not campaign at all. He was in a basement for most of the time. When he made public appearances, he strung together sentences that were so ragingly incoherent that most of us thought it was a joke. The left was told that they needed to defeat Donald Trump by any means necessary. At this point, the technological mind control that exists is the most sophisticated it's ever been. It's not getting any sloppier, I'll tell you that much, Kyle. Whether we had an ironclad, real democracy with voter integrity, expert counting, and no margin of error is inconsequential at this point, because free will is all but extinguished by the social engineering made possible by cell phones, screens, all forms of digital media, hundreds of touch points daily to reinforce people's worldviews. All throughout Donnie J's presidency, and even to this day, people are enticed, mainly on the Reddit and Twitter platforms, which is now X, Kyle, to go to 4chan, which is pretty destabilizing for any normal person if you've never been there before. A lot of language that is not really used on most websites. A lot of unfiltered takes, let's just call it like it is. But there's also free-flowing discussion about major issues taking place on the Chan. People who are upset about being censored on Reddit, Twitter, other platforms are corralled into using the Chans. And that's when you've got QAnon, Kyle. A 3-letter agency whodunit to captivate the hearts and minds of disaffected boomers, many of whom are rightfully pretty concerned about the direction of the country, economically, socially, politically, judicially, legislatively, you name it. Many of these people get pretty fired up on the whole QAnon thing, which is just a digital Nancy Drew novel. Highly ambiguous language telling people that they could sit back and enjoy the show as the entire country was restored to justice by benevolent actors behind the scenes, and that they needn't worry about anything, lulling many politically motivated people into inaction and saying, haha, just you wait. Here come the arrests of all the corrupt individuals in our government. Democrats and Republicans alike. We're going to clean up the show and drain the swamp, just like Donnie J said. Turns out that's not really happening. The QAnon thing morphs to create what we now know as January 6th, or the holding down of our democracy and sucking on its privates. The outcome of January 6th, as we know, was the establishment crowing that our country was on the brink to justify their ratcheting up of authoritarian measures and start taking political prisoners. And saying, look, Donnie J tried to take over the government. Even though on January 6th, Donnie J was like, okay, folks, we're the party of law and order. Everybody go home. And then they did. Huge insurrection that was. People leaving when they're asked to. What a narrow miss. The government was almost captured, Kyle. Just think about what could have happened if they weren't asked to leave. Or that they didn't do it. They stuck around for a few more hours. My goodness. The economy is still trash. In fact, it's getting worse. COVID is used to authorize more censorship, and so much money is printed in such a short time period that any rational economist had to have been barfing constantly and saying, what are we doing? Experimental medicine is rolled out to the population in a hurried fashion. At this point, people who have been ideologically captured over the past decade by any of this social justice, intersectionality, and moralizing language were easily convinced to take a very concerning whodunit, multiple doses of it. Even though the development of this started under Orange Cheeto, Hitler in disguise, the COVID debacle was so full of incongruent nonsense that anybody with a couple brain cells was like, wait, you want me to take an experimental medicine in exchange for a donut? Like, what are you even talking about? That set a lot of people off, but not the people who had been completely mentally captured by the hive mind, mind control, social justice, overly moralizing propaganda apparatus over the past decade. Those people were easily coached into taking whatever it is that was in those vaccines because it was framed as a moral imperative and what smart people do. So you have these overeducated dumbasses who want to feel smart, who know they're not smart. They want to feel moral because that is a human compulsion. So you put those things together and bam, you've got people injecting themselves with science juice and crowing about how amazing they are as people. Money is being printed like nobody's business. Inflation is spiking in a monumental way. People are getting even poorer. And the economic reality of life in the United States is becoming much bleaker for everybody. Yet most people are focused on this terrible disease that has a 99.9% survival rate, and the moral implications of taking or not taking experimental medicine. There were a ton of medical complications that resulted from that rushed experimental medicine. To keep people from focusing on that very real issue, enter the war in Ukraine, whatever the hell's been going on over there. U.S. politicians and other prominent figures in the United States begin laundering money through elaborate cryptocurrency schemes and otherwise, enriching themselves as the U.S. continues to plummet economically. People care more about the country of Ukraine, which most of these people cannot find on a map, than they care about their own country. Diseases of despair in the United States are increasing at an alarming rate. The economics are not getting any better. All the while, a handful of people are talking about how important it is for us to pay more taxes to international bodies to change the weather, all while ignoring the largest polluting entities in the world, China, India, and multinational corporations. The corruption and economic fuckery is so flagrant that a normal person can't ignore it. You don't even have to be that dialed into things to be like, hey, so like there's a lot of white collar crime going on, blue collar crime as well. Then we get our favorite figure back into the news cycle with a bunch of lawsuits and indictments. The left is angry, but secretly loves it because they love simple explanations to why things are shitty. They don't want to consider the complexity of the interplay between economics and the forced cultural trends that are actually destroying the country, and the pharmaceutical fuckery, money laundering, insane crime rate. No, none of those things matter. We just got to get Donnie J. Then everything will be good and democracy will be driven by us, the designated drivers of governance style. And we'll end the night with a business handshake with democracy's dad. They're going to start saying shit like this, by the way, Kyle. But the right is pretty frustrated by this. So let's wrap up the entire decade-long history lesson now, Kyle. And now we're back very much in the present. People on the right who think that democracy is real and that our government isn't a total meme are getting very upset about the whole justice whodunit. The left are achieving rage boners because their favorite guy to hate, who exists in their comic book level worldview, they think they're going to get him. And if he's arrested, it'll save democracy, which, as we all know, makes no sense. If this were all real, arresting your political opponents isn't the most democratic thing that you could hypothetically do. None of these indictments or charges or anything will stick to Donnie J, which will enrage the left. Donnie J will win 2024 by design. It's exactly how 2016 went when they were like, how could this have happened? Hillary was supposed to win. People on the left are going to say, how did he win? He was supposed to be in jail. This is just like Nazi Germany. Although there will be no historical comparisons that link what we're going through to Nazi Germany, they will be drawn. The levels of catastrophic violence that we see after the trigger event of the 2024 election will be so pervasively calamitous that we're not going to know what the hell is going on. But here's the real thing to focus on, is this is all being used to distract people from what? That's right, Kyle. The economy that's on its last legs at this point. Our whole country has been pretty much sucked dry, and this will be the mayhem that the country's demise is blamed on. Rather than the people who have purposefully destroyed American culture to obfuscate the economic reality, rather than focus on that, the focus will be on the quote-unquote justice and morality of the 2024 election. All the violence will be blamed on Donnie J, authorizing and justifying the usage of any means necessary to quote-unquote take back the country. This is what's happening, Kyle. So we see the show on the surface, much like I see the occasional smile on your face, but I know that underneath, Kyle, it's complex and mainly rooted in economics. Kyle, I don't have a ton of money to pay you. You've been an unpaid intern for over 3 years now. Granted, you've got family money and that doesn't concern you a ton, but I get it. You'd like to be making a little bit more coin. But people's frustration with the economic reality has been blurred by top-down impositions of insane moral and cultural inversions. Kyle, I hope that I'm wrong about all of this, but I get the sense that I'm not. Our country's in a very odd space, and in a lot of ways has already collapsed. The social fabric is so frayed in some cities that there's absolutely nothing that can be done to rectify widespread criminality, filth, and dysfunction. Kyle, this episode is not funny at all. It's just like way too serious and on point. What the hell? Hopefully I didn't bounce around too much. I wanted to keep this one in a straight line, but give people some historical perspective to let you know exactly where we're headed. Hopefully, Kyle, we've achieved that. But that's going to wrap it up. I'm going to land the plane on this. That's DarbyCast. That's Wildcard Friday. If you're new here, listen to episode 170 or 136, maybe 153. If you want to understand what the typical tone and texture of this podcast is all about, it is not like this episode. But I do reserve the right, like I said previously, to swing for the fences and go for something that is very straightforward and stated explicitly. Kyle, you're a great guy. Enjoy your day. Things are going to get better. Lincoln Park, not bad, but like, if you're listening to it all the time, I get the sense that you're hurting. We all do, Kyle.